Howdy everyone, this is Dave, and I have a diabolically evil Disney villain that I want to talk about. This video will cover the Horned King, from Disney's 25th animated feature film, The Black Cauldron. This movie came out on July 24th, 1985, and is an adaptation based on the first two books of the Chronicles of Prydain series, written by Lloyd Alexander. The Book of Three and The Black Cauldron. I did not grow up with this movie in my life, and the same goes for the books. So my first time checking them out was for the purpose of creating this video. I grew up in a strict religious household, and even though I could get by with most Disney movies, there were a few where it was like, absolutely not. And this one would have been on that list, if it was even on the radar to begin with. I don't actually remember hearing anything about this movie until its VHS release in 1998. All I knew about it came from commercials, and honestly, I had zero interest in watching it. I didn't even know about the production hell it went through, or that it was a massive flop at the box office, grossing $21.3 million on a $44 million budget. And them spending that much on this movie almost destroyed the company. It was the first animated feature to be given a PG rating, and that brought some controversy with its younger audiences. The older audiences didn't mind though. Watching this recently, I thought some of the sequences were pretty rad. But you already know there were little kids and parents that thought differently. The Horned King is voiced by John Hurt, and this is one of the most vile and unapologetically evil Disney villains ever. Disney's adaptation of the character differs from the Horned King in the books in basically every way. He is a great warrior draped in crimson, who is god tier at riding and swordsmanship, donning a mask made from a human skull, with fierce antlers fixed on top. I'm not sure if he has any mystical abilities or if it's just his level 100 in intimidation, but he freaks everyone out. The Disney version is a horrid, emaciated creature of a paranormal variety. Decaying skin draped over a skeletal frame. He's got some long-ass nails, and his head is depicted as a legit rotting skull, containing a jacked-up grill and red eyes. This version also wears crimson, a cloak with the hood up, his horns protruding from the cloth. He sports a fur stole wrapped around his bony shoulders. Many consider Disney's Horned King to be a lich, or some sort of demonic entity, indubitably in the undead category. Since this adaptation is a scary skeleton, and not a scary dude with bloody arms and a skull mask with antlers. My question is, whose skull is that? Imagine having a mask made out of someone else's head. The flick opens up with the fade-in shot of the Black Cauldron, with exposition provided to us via voiceover, about an evil king that everyone was afraid of, including the gods. They don't say his name, but it's meant to be the spirit of Arin Deathlord, who is a sorcerer and plays a much larger role throughout the books. They kinda switch roles, and the Horned King shares more of Arin's character traits. Unable to be contained in something as simple as a prison, he eventually met his gnarly fate by being thrown into a crucible of molten iron. His body was incinerated by the intense heat, and his spirit was captured, taking the form of a BBC. That means Big Black Cauldron. For many hundreds of years, the Black Cauldron remained hidden. Which is for the best because the only people out searching for it want to use it for evil things. Mainly its power to resurrect an army of deathless warriors. The army of the dead would have no problem overwhelming the opposition and carving a path of destruction to the throne. So yeah, it is in everyone's best interest to not let this happen. It is a very serious matter. We're presented an establishing shot of an ideal setup. This house in the woods with a river running in front of it is something I'd totally live in. Especially in a Disney movie because for the most part there aren't any bugs. Most certainly no mosquitoes or fucking ticks. The house belongs to a wizard named Caer Dallben, who has a bad feeling about the return of the Horned King. Dallben is the keeper of an oracular pig named Henwin, and has an assistant pig keeper named Taran that lives there too. Even though Taran will go on to have character development, the version we get here is level 1, hasn't played the tutorial, and doesn't know shit about shit. He is daydreaming about the awful thought of the war being over before he is old enough to fight in it, not considering all of the horrific implications that go along with war. Dallben knows this all too well, and recognizes how blind Taran is to the dangers ahead. His age is never specifically given, but I'd say he's around 13 or 14. He's at that age where he already wants to be grown up and doing heroic things. He's not a fan of his lot in life of being an assistant pig keeper. The communication in that house must be lacking because Taran doesn't understand the reason why Henwin is such a big deal. And he wasn't taught values such as humility. He's a hotshot that thinks very highly of himself and is very arrogant in abilities that he has yet to put into practice. Not only is that annoying to watch, but he takes the Skywalker approach and comes off as whiny, even more so in the books. He thinks of himself as the god's gift to Prydain, and can't help but tell everyone about it. That's pretty true to his character in the books, as the first thing he does in the Book of 3 is whine and complain about making horseshoes when he wants to make a sword. Henwin starts tripping, so Dallben orders Taran to bring the pig inside. After performing the ritual to activate Henwin's powers, they see a vision of the Horned King and his Gwythaints, searching for the Black Cauldron. Dallben tells Taran about the Black Cauldron and the Horned King's intentions of domination. The party is over when the vision shows them that he is also seeking out the oracular pig. Dallben orders Taran to take Henwin to another cabin to hide, as he wraps up the most pathetic provisions possible. Just an apple and a small slice of bread. I thought he was going to give him the whole loaf, but nope, just the end piece.
The rest is for me.
Taran continues to spout his ignorance about the terrible threat, and says that he is not afraid of the Horned King, to which Dallben calls him a foolish fuckface. After goodbyes are said, both Taran and Henwin begin their journey. This differs from the book in basically every way. Instead, Henwin gets out of the pen and takes off, Taran giving chase. This is where he sees the Horned King for the first time, galloping on his horse, searching. Then he meets Prince Gwydion, and travels with him for a bit. In their short time together, Taran has to take things into account that he never thought of before, such as a hero having to sleep on the ground, or not judging another hero based on appearance over merit. He is put in his place multiple times by the experienced warrior, and if anything, proves to be a burden and a liability. There are several characters that were left out of the Disney adaptation, but I just wanted to mention Gwydion and how badass he is. Literally a textbook definition of heroism, with his kindness, compassion, and cool logical approach being greater assets than his ability to kick your ass. I'd be cool with an entire book about just him. Back to the movie. We see a dark castle and Gwythaints flying by. The first glimpse we see of this video's topic is his horned silhouette. He moves slowly down the stairs and stops at a pit of bodies that have been decomposing to nothing but skeletons. He has a monologue about being powerful and using the cauldron to raise the piles of bones up as Cauldron-born, which essentially means that the skeletons will be reanimated by the power of the cauldron and then be used to start fighting everything. He also wants to be worshipped, so he is getting off big time on the thought of having an undead army treat him as a god. We aren't given much detail on whose skeletons these are, or if they would be agreeing to any of this if they were still alive. That would be messed up to have your enemy keep your corpse around after you were long dead, and then later use your skeleton to do their bidding. As Taran and Henwin continue their journey, Taran can't help but give himself all of the flowers. If that's not annoying enough, he loses Henwin, and then that leaves us wide open to be introduced to a character that is even more exasperating than Taran. It is a hairy, matted up creature with a creepy stash named Gurgi. I really didn't know anything about this movie before I watched it, and as soon as this guy appeared on screen, I was like, oh. What were they thinking having not one, but two unlikable characters in the same movie? And every time he's on screen, I can't wait for him to leave. Thankfully, he isn't in it as much as he could have been. Taran hears Henwin screaming, and rushes to find her being snatched up by the Gwythaints, and he totally beefs it trying to save her. He climbs up the jagged terrain to get a better view of where they went, and he sees the Horned King's castle in the distance. He has no choice but to infiltrate. As he is climbing up the stone of the castle, some of the wall gives way, and he is able to slip through the hole. All I can think of this scene is something out of Elder Scrolls. He finds the dining hall where all of the Horned King's goons are eating, drinking, and enjoying some entertainment, in celebration of catching Henwin. A goblin named Creeper is the Horned King's second in command. And right away we know he receives zero respect from anyone. He takes shit from both his master and his subordinates, even though he outranks them. This guy with the bone appears to have a very lax gag reflex. Reminds me of like 2007 being at the Renaissance Festival, eating a drumstick, and some dude working there shouts,
"You're quite good at sucking that meat down, my lord."
Then looked at my girlfriend at the time and was like,
"You better watch out for him, my lady."
Hit me with the incendiary round. He wasn't wrong though. I was tearing that thing up. Taran watches from his hiding spot, catching the Horned King's entrance, and it totally changes the vibe of the party. Creeper starts kissing bony ass cheeks, and overzealously tries to command Henwin to use her abilities, but she ain't having any of that. So Creeper instead attempts to drown her out of self-preservation, because Creeper is blamed for anything that goes wrong, and is constantly on the receiving end of severe punishment. We see him being abused by the Horned King on a regular basis, and it seems like his favorite form of punishment is with his skeletal hand around his throat. Creeper takes a red-hot coal from the fire with a pair of tongs, and approaches Henwin. Taran has to do something, so he may as well draw all the attention to himself, by falling from his hiding spot and causing a disruption. He better be terrified. Each and every one of these guys could hew him in two with no problem. One of them almost pokes his guts out. The Horned King deduces that Taran is the keeper of the oracular pig, and tells him to get Henwin to spill it on the whereabouts of the Black Cauldron. Taran states that he can't do that. At least he shows some backbone here, because he has all but let them complete their mission at this point. He swiftly changes his mind for good reason, after the Horned King sends the poor sow to the chopping block. This part is awful. This adorable pig is jarringly out of place in this dingy, hopeless setting. But let's just analyze this for a second. There is a chopping block in the mess hall, where people are eating. Not very sanitary. There's also bloodstains on the wood, indicating that this has been used before. And if it's been used before, then I'm assuming it's been used hundreds of times. This may, in fact, be a replacement for the first block that got worn down from frequency of use. There's a full-time executioner wearing a black hood, holding an axe, waiting at the ready to lop someone's dome off. They have it down to a science because the Horned King doesn't even have to say anything. He just shatters his chalice, and that's enough to get the ball rolling. I bet Creeper was responsible for quite a few soldiers being offed, since he is in constant fight or flight, and has to throw everything under the bus just to stay alive for a while longer. Anyways, Taran can't bear to have his pig chopped up, and neither can we. So he says that he will get Henwin to do her thing. Taran begins the ritual, and a vision of the Black Cauldron appears. This excites the Horned King because it confirms that the cauldron actually exists, which I guess is something he was unsure about, even though he's been obsessing over it. He gets up from his throne and inches toward them, instructing the boy to tell him where it is. He then jump scares Taran by coming at him with outstretched hands and red eyes.
Never should have come here.
Taran fearfully runs, stepping on the bowl and flinging the contents at the Horned King, which apparently hurts him real bad, because he writhes in pain. Taran grabs Henwin and makes a run for it. After avoiding capture, they reach the roof and Taran pushes Henwin off of the ramparts and into the moat below. Before Taran can join her, he is grabbed by Creeper.
Gotcha, pig boy.
And locked in the dungeon. He doesn't stay there for long, because he is rescued by Princess Alanwe, who is also being held prisoner, and her golden peladrin, or bauble, basically a magical sentient floating orb thing. Princess Alanwe is a pleasant addition to the story, because unlike Taran, she is much more intelligent, competent, and most importantly, not annoying. In fact, I feel bad for her having to deal with this guy. In the book, she gets some great jabs in, but it's rather tame here. She doesn't roast him for being an assistant pig keeper. She just takes his occupation as someone who simply can't help her escape, and she will have to continue to rely on herself. She does offer to let him come along though, which he gladly accepts, The magical sphere is very helpful as they make their way through the dark. They stumble upon the burial chamber of a great warrior, whom was the king of the castle before the Horned King took it over. There is a deleted scene that gives a little backstory. They repurposed Prince Gwydion's name and referred to the deceased as King Gwydion. Taran takes note of the warrior's sword and can't help but swoop it. They see a couple of other things, like Creeper open the door for a man hauling a cart of skeletons into the castle, and an old bard named Fluter Flam being locked up in another dungeon that seems to be a special place for bards. Fluter is met with his gruesome end face to face as he sees the skeleton of a fellow bard locked up just like he is. He shouldn't expect company anytime soon, because it seems like the punishment towards bards is to lock them up and simply forget. Fluter has a magical harp that he carries around his neck. The harp practically plays itself. Just pluck one string and it plays a beautiful melody. But whenever Fluter lies, the harp breaks one of its strings, and he has to spend a lot of time repairing them. This isn't elaborated upon in the movie or the books, but this harp seems to understand what's going on, and is able to show some sort of expression. Is there a person trapped inside that thing? Has a soul been locked away in that inanimate object, and the only way it can communicate its disdain is by doing damage to itself? How long has it been like this? How did Fluter come to own it? Nobody questions anything about the harp, except that they know it's a bullshit detector for a very dishonest bard. Taran falls and drops the sword off a bridge, and comes face to face with one of the brutes that slaps the spirit out of him. The dude starts swinging his axe, but Taran dodges it enough to grab the sword and block an oncoming blow. If it had been any other sword, you know that powerful swing would have plowed right through that pitiful pig boy's defenses. But this isn't just an ordinary sword. I think it's pronounced Drimwin. This enchanted sword is very powerful, and when the edge strikes something, it emits a great blazing energy that can easily destroy just about anything. The brute's axe shatters into pieces, and he runs away. The sword is essential to their escape.
Never should have come here.
And eventually all three of them get out. That doesn't bode well for Creeper, who knows he will get blamed for them escaping, and will be punished for it. However, he is pleasantly surprised when the Horned King does not choke him out, and instead tells him to send the Gwythaints after them. The next scene shows Taran, Elanwe, and Fluter sitting next to a river. Taran's head inflates, bragging that it was him who got them out of the castle, and that it takes a great warrior to handle the sword. Taran starts talking down to Elanwe, and says girls can't do stuff, but she puts him in his place, considering it was her who broke him free, and that he would still be rotting in that dungeon if it wasn't for her. The spat ends in tears, but they get past it. It's a relatively short conflict in the movie, but in the books they are constantly at each other's throats. It becomes a burden after a while, and actually Elanwe is the one who takes charge of the sword. Taran doesn't even get to touch it until later on. Gurgi shows up and starts causing trouble. Before he is sent away, he informs the party that he saw pig tracks and can lead them to Henwin. Gurgi takes him to the fair folk, and Henwin is safe. In the book, Doli is a dwarf that helps them along their journey, but in this movie, he's a fairy with anger issues that leads them to the marches of Morva, where the Black Cauldron is located. Eventually, they find a house that belongs to 3 witches, and it's teeming with frogs. Come to find out, the witches have no problem turning people into amphibians. Fluter catches one of the witches' fancy, and she offers to pluck his harp. He's changed from human to frog and back a few times, and some of these visuals are messed up. Trying to boil him alive and eat him. Look at his expression. He winds up finding solitude between the witch's massive jugs.
Boo!
Which I'm sure out of all of the awful deaths that could befall him on this quest, that's one of the better ways to go. The witches offered to trade Taran's sword for the Black Cauldron, and he accepts. In the book, they don't want anything that they have to offer, except a magic brooch that Taran got from another character that died. The brooch empowers the person wearing it with wisdom, visions, and dreams. It was a heavy cost. In the book, they also find the Black Cauldron in a shed outside the witch's house. The witches also go into a lot more detail about wanting to turn them into frogs. They must really enjoy doing that to people. Talk about them not having a care in the world after that except for all of the predators that will eat them. The witches also talk about Dalbin and how they raised him from a baby. They provide some backstory on how he got his magical powers. Apparently they were making a wisdom potion and he was helping them stir. The kettle boiled over and some of it burned Dalbin's fingers, and he immediately put them in his mouth as a reaction. After that, he knew everything that the witches knew, and he had to leave shortly after that. None of that happens in the movie. It's just a straight trade between the cauldron and the magic sword. Taran and the gang receive the Black Cauldron, but unfortunately there's not much they can do with it, because in order to destroy the thing, someone has to willingly climb into it and sacrifice their life. Nobody's gonna do that. And the thing's massive, so they're just stuck with it. Dolly snaps on them like an a-hole and dips. Good. Take your unpleasantness someplace else and get some Marcus Aurelius in your life while you're at it. The Gwythaints and soldiers show up and take possession of the Black Cauldron, capturing everyone except Gurgi. They are taken back to the Horned King's castle, and Taran, Elanwe, and Fluter are forced to watch as the Horned King sets a skeleton inside of the cauldron. A green mist/slimy substance covers the collection of skeletons that are laying across the floor, and they are reanimated. The living are terrified and flee once the Cauldron-born attack them. There's a quick sequence where 3 skeletons are leaping onto 2 men. Originally, there was an extra part where you see the body melt, but it was removed. My favorite part is seeing how unfazed they are after seeing this happen. If this gruesome sequence was left in, just the softest
It's horrible.
from Elanwe, which doesn't seem weird with the theatrical edit we got, but it would be out of place if she said that after seeing some bodies liquefy. The Horned King orders the undead army to go forth and destroy everything. His mission appears to be complete, and he basks in his greatest triumph of sitting back and letting all of his henchmen complete his tasks for him. He literally does nothing. Gurgi sneaks into the castle and rescues the gang. Taran decides that he needs to sacrifice himself to end this once and for all. Gurgi stops him and jumps in himself. I know this is supposed to be sad and whatnot, but I just have no attachment to these 2 characters whatsoever. They both could jump in and I wouldn't give a crap. Gurgi's sacrifice undoes the Cauldron-born ritual, and the army begins falling. Taran tells Elanwe and Fluter to leave because he thinks there might be a chance to save Gurgi, and I'm not sure how, because nothing like that was ever discussed. But either way, the cauldron begins sucking all of the air out of the room. Taran has to grab onto a pillar as the Horned King enters choking Creeper. He doesn't seem to be affected by the wind tunnel that's going on in there. He grabs the kid and picks him up by the face. Taran, still holding onto the ring in the wall, pushes off with his feet and throws the Horned King off balance. This is enough to get him caught in the wind. He tries to satisfy the cauldron by throwing Taran in it. That doesn't work, and the Horned King gets pulled toward it, unable to escape. That thing does not discriminate, as it will gladly devour him just as much as anyone else. The Horned King cries out and even curses the cauldron, but none of that is going to help. His hands grasp the rim, but the force is so powerful that it begins ripping his cloak and even the skin off of his bones. That is an interesting detail for me. We can see that the horns are an actual part of his anatomy. The rest of him is engulfed in flames and annihilated right on the spot. Nothing but fragments are left. Creeper is horrified by what happened to his master, but only for like 2 seconds. He's actually ecstatic and doesn't know what to do with himself. He hops on one of the Gwythaints and flies away. The cauldron begins to melt down and crumble the castle, but everyone else makes it out. The witches show up wanting the cauldron back and offer the sword in trade. But instead Taran asks them to bring Gurgi back from the dead. We don't have to worry about it too much though, because the movie wraps up with them heading back to Dalbin's place for what I'm assuming is the next adventure. But we'll never see it because they never made another one. The end. I'm surprised at how much was changed from the original source material. The Horned King's death is much different in the Book of Three. 4 of the Horned King's soldiers catch up to Taran, Fluter, Elanwe, Gurgi, and Doli the dwarf. They defend themselves and shoot 2 of the soldiers in the neck with arrows, causing the rest to retreat. Later that night they have to duck and hide because a slew of soldiers are holding torches, riding through, searching for them. They can't go anywhere without running into the Horned King's men. Within no time they're found out, and Taran and Elanwe flee on Malengar, the horse. As they break for the brow of a hill, only one rider is following them. Taran looks over his shoulder and sees antlers. The Horned King was following them, gaining on them too. His black steed stays on top of them as they ride through the trees. Eventually he rides ahead and cuts them off, sending Taran and Elanwe flying from Malengar's saddle. The Horned King turns back and charges. Taran holds up his sword as the Horned King's blade comes crashing down on it, shattering to pieces. Taran rushes to Elanwe and grabs the hilt of Dernwyn, but it wouldn't come out of the sheath. He ends up turning with it, and his whole arm explodes in a magical blast. The sword flies out of Taran's hand, and he falls to the ground. Elanwe throws herself at the Horned King, but he tosses her aside. Before he can get the killing blow, Prince Gwydion appears and tells the Horned King his real name, which he learned from Henwin. This is essentially the ultimate finishing move, and the Horned King is struck by a flash of lightning, and his body bursts into flames. His mask melts, like molten iron. I'm not sure if he comes back later because he was never viewed as the greatest threat in the story, and he doesn't interact with the Black Cauldron either. It's another character, King Morgant, that tries to summon Cauldronborn and do stuff that aligns more with the film. A good amount of the movie is basically the Book of Three, and I was not expecting to find such little taken from the Black Cauldron itself. Creeper isn't in the books, but there is a really douchey character named Eladir that appears in the Black Cauldron, who is the one calling Taran Pig Boy all the time. I'm keeping it brief, but this guy is pretty terrible throughout the entire book. He does a redeeming thing at the end though. Eladir selflessly throws himself into the cauldron instead of Gurgi, but the way he does it is pretty epic. King Morgant's taken aback by Eladir charging the cauldron, like what is this guy doing, and begins shouting, "Slay him! Slay him!" to his soldiers. One even stabs him before he jumps in. Ultimately, the Disney adaptation of the Horned King is a ruthless and demonic being that is without mercy. His evil knows no bounds, as he wishes to rule over a hellscape with an undead army at his disposal. This guy has bad news written all over his ugly face, and he needed to just go away. The Horned King made a few appearances afterwards, in games and the House of Mouse. He also played a role in the Cinderella ride at Tokyo Disneyland. He's got a cool look to him, and is definitely among the more mature Disney villains that the company ever created. Alright everyone, that's all I've got for now. What do you think about this villain, and how do you feel about this movie in general? If you enjoy my content, please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Until next time, have a good one.